My name is Oenkosi Sikula. I am in IB1 and I will be moderating today's speaker series. I am not alone. I am with my co-moderator and I will hand over to him to introduce himself. All right, I believe he'll introduce himself once he is back. So today we are here for a very important speaker series, one of the best ones we've had this year, which we hope will be interactive. And we just wanted to remind each and everyone that the recording of the speaker series will be available. And please do, when you enter, make sure you mute. And the chat is always open for any interactions, any questions, comments. We love to read them and scroll through them from time to time. And yes, and on that behalf, I will introduce today's speaker series. In 2018, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Energy launched Eswatini Energy Master Plan from 2020 to 2035, which included plans for a 30 megawatt coal power plant in Lubuku, Mpaga. Coal will be sourced from the nearby region. The power plant is proposed to be implemented in 2 phases, consisting of 200 megawatt generators in phase 1 and another 100 megawatts in phase 2. A feasibility study was released in 2020. So the speaker series will discuss this project as we work to find a balance between development and sustainability. And we hope at the end of the day to answer, how do we restore our earth while ensuring development happens in Eswatini? So thank you everyone for attending. I will just like to check if my co-moderator is around. All right, then I assume he will join us soon. I will start reading the bios and introducing the lovely panelists we have today. The first panelist we have is Kulegani Msweli. Kulegani Msweli attended WK from 1998 to 2001. He's a designer, artist, and social entrepreneur. He was born in Vuvulane, Eswatini, and spent most of his time and early years of primary and high school education in Eswatini, acquired higher education and work experience in England. In 2010, Msweli established Jerempal, or Jerempal, a multi-award-winning high-end design and art lifestyle brand. His latest venture has been the establishment of the Vuvulane food market. Msweli's greatest wish is to continue utilizing his art, design, and general creativity to bring about meaningful human-centered development in his Vuvulane community through his family foundation, Vuvulane Orphans and Vulnerable Children's Foundation, where he operates as the board secretary. And the next panelist we have today is Dane Armstrong. Dane attended WK in the forms from 1999 to 2001. He is a community-oriented environmentalist, researcher, artist, and activist working on projects that specifically address climate justice and creative freedom of expression. He is the co-founder and active member of Eswatini Climate Coalition, a climate justice group, and Solidarity Eswatini, a mutual aid NGO focused on resilient community development, and Yebo, a contemporary art design gallery and design studio, Outreach Community Arts NGO, and Eswatini Urban Gardens, increasing food access and equity through agroecological urban food solutions. Our next panelist, we have Mangaliso Mohammed. Mangaliso Mohammed attended WK from 2000 to 2006. He is a senior research fellow at Eswatini Economic Policy Analysis and Research Center. The organization plays a big role in conducting independent policy studies that assess the functionality and effectiveness of the government of Eswatini's policies. In particular, Mangaliso's policy analysis is grounded on the National Development Strategy, the Poverty Reduction Strategy and Action Plan, and the revised NDS, which is the Strategy for Sustainable Development and Inclusive Growth. He has vast experience in conducting interdisciplinary research, particularly conducting baseline and impact studies to articulate the social and economic value of various development programs and projects in the Kingdom of Eswatini. And then the next panelist is Dr. Wisdom Jamini. Dr. Jamini is an environmental scientist with research interest and administrative experience in Earth observation and geospatial modeling applications in areas such as climate change, land management, environmental management, biodiversity conservation, natural hazards and management, and phytogeography. He has been extensively involved in the development of national environmental policy and strategy documents related to conservation, invasive species, and climate change. He is an inaugural member of the Kingdom of Eswatini Academy of Science. His technical savvy afforded him international recognition, including scientific research in Digital Globe's inaugural Worldview 2 Satellite 8-band Global Research Challenge, and as a fellow for the Global Observation of Forest and Land Cover Dynamics Data Initiative. Dr. Jamini also publishes in peer-reviewed international journals and chapters in books. He also reviews for various high impact factor international peer-reviewed journals. In addition, he regularly examines master's and PhD theses and dissertations for higher learning institutions outside Eswatini. And lastly, one of our very own, my favorite, my peer, Rashida Mancha. Rashida Mancha is an IB1 at Waterford from Bangladesh. She has lived 16 years of her life in the bustling city of Dhaka. Rashida writes, talk about climate was so rare over there despite the pollution and problems that it required it. Coming to Waterford for IB has allowed her to engage in more conversations around the environment and policy in general. Rashida loves speaking and debating, as well as writing. She says Waterford has been such a fulfilling experience in that aspect. And these are our lovely panelists. We are so grateful that you are here, and we're grateful to the audience that is here with us. This is a reminder that the chat is open for interactions, and we shall begin the speaker series. Firstly, though, before I continue, I would like to open the floor for everyone the panelists specifically, to introduce themselves in 1 minute or less. And what we're eager to know is your stance on the coal plant and one thing that we may not know about you. And we will start with Kulerani.
Owengosi for such great introductions, and hi to everyone who's joining us tonight. It's such a pleasure to be here. I think as Owengosi more or less mentioned my specific bio, I won't get into that. So my stance or my position, Lupugu thermal coal-powered plant, which is being proposed to be created in Eswatini. I think from day one, when I more or less came across the project and it started kind of gaining traction on mainstream platforms most of last year, of course, my first initial thought was that this is just wrong. No, it cannot go ahead, because one, I think more especially because I live in the area, the whole project will be in Lupugu, which is in the Lubombo region, and I'm based in Vuvulane, which is not too far from Lupugu. And I think having lived most of my life in a rural community and understanding the dynamics of new projects, it just felt wrong. So yeah, so I'll kind of leave it at that. And one thing you do not know about me, I don't know. My life tend to be shared a lot on social medias and general mainstream media. But I'd say I enjoy cooking and baking.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to Mangaliso.
Okay, thank you for that. Good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Mangaliso. I am an economist as well as an environmentalist. So that's something you do not know about me, that I'm an economist, but also an environmentalist by training. So for me, I think I am for the project because to me, it talks about economic stimulation as well as addressing issues of poverty and energy poverty in Eswatini. I think I will leave it like that for now.
And we will go to Dane next.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for the great introductions and the opportunity. So my name is Dane Armstrong, and yeah, I wear lots of different hats in Eswatini, doing all kinds of various things. It's hard to explain sometimes what I do. I'm definitely not in favor of this project as somebody who wears predominantly hat of climate change and adaptation. And though I totally understand why we need an energy project. Something you don't know about me? Good question. My middle name is Matendele, which was also my grandfather's name in Eswatini many moons ago. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mancha?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for addressing me as Mancha. That is a name I like to go by. I think that's something you didn't know about me for everyone here. I am an IB1 at Waterford this year from Bangladesh, as always said. And personally, I do not know enough about this project to, I think, have a very strong opinion as to if it should go on or shouldn't. But from everything I do know, ideally, I would hope that it didn't have to go through because, and speaking from the point of an environmentalist or just, it would be better if, in my opinion, if it didn't have to go through. I have read about how it's necessary. So I think in the course of this discussion, we'll get to know. Yeah, I'll have a concrete opinion later.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Dr. Jamini.
Hi again, everyone. I'd already introduced myself, but I think coming specifically to this project, for one, I'm not for the project. I have a number of reasons which I'll probably articulate later in the discussion, some of which are not only environmental, but social and even economic reasons. Sometimes it's easy to dismiss, or to look at some of these projects as an answer to energy problems, when in fact they may not. But I'll articulate my reasoning a little later on. Well, something that you don't know about me, probably a lot, but maybe for this discussion, one thing that you don't know about me is that I'm affected by the project. Maybe I'll be biased. My home area is Mbaga or Malinza, which is not very far from the project area. Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone. And if you can, in the chat, please also do let us know what is your stance on the coal power plant. And with that said, I will hand over to my co-moderator, Lindelwa.
Good evening, everyone. Just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Dindela Njarala, and I'm in Form 5. I came to WK in Form 1, 2017, and I am always co-moderator, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's discussing answers and everything. So our next question is, why does the world continue to use coal? And I'd like to direct this to Dr. Jamini and Dane.
Okay, I'll start. Actually, when I looked at that question, or listening to that question, it triggered probably it's the same question that you would ask about oil. Why is the world hooked on oil? Again, there's very good answers to that. But to come back to this particular question, one of the biggest reasons that the debate around transitioning to low carbon economies or low carbon economic growth, it's because of the tie to jobs. And of course, one of the things I personally saw that at Mbaga, when the Mbaga coal mine was shut down in the early 90s, I was still a very young boy then. But when it was shut down, people lost their jobs, and the whole complex became, or is actually, a ghost area. So that's one of the things that keeps particularly politicians hooked up to coal, that it's the jobs. I think for me, that is the number one reason why we're still addicted to coal. And of course, the whole global economy is still largely based on the neo-classical economics approach, which basically, when applied to development policy, tends to overlook or even undervalue some of the other concerns, developmental concerns, ecological concerns, environmental concerns, and even to a certain extent, social concerns. So oftentimes we just focus on the economics. Even then the economics are not adequately addressed because of some of the reasonings. I'll discuss that later on, but just to give it that's my thought on why the world is still sort of hooked on oil. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Jamini. Can we please have Dane?
Thanks. Yeah, that's the multi-billion Emalangeni question. So to summarize that I'll try and do that in 2 minutes. Why did we start using coal? Coal is one of the most, if not the most amazing energy source that we've ever discovered. And it's the reason why we have everything that we've got today. No doubt an incredible energy source. So what powered the Industrial Revolution and every single development we've seen since then. Why did we continue using coal? After we knew that how damaging it was from the middle of the 20th century onwards, is mostly to do with power and money. Obviously, it continues being an amazing energy source in terms of just the energy generated, but there was a lot of effort put into suppressing the science behind this in much the same way that tobacco companies did with cigarettes for the longest time. And from the 1950s onwards, we've known exactly what kind of world we'd be entering if we continue to burn fossil fuels, yet we continue to do so anyway, mostly due to big lobbying from powerful companies and politicians around the world, mostly in the global north. And why are we continuing to push this? Just like Dr. Lamini said, it's mostly because our development models are still rooted in the past. We don't consider externalities or true costs when we think about new or existing projects that are coming up. If we did, cost of things would be much more different because they would take these things into account. So tiny summary, but yeah, started off with energy, ends with money and power.
Thank you so much. For those who are unaware, could you briefly share what exactly the Lubuku power plant is and what it means for you and in your area of expertise? And this question is open to everyone. And since you're here, Dane, we will start with you.
The project is based on the very real fact that Eswatini is not completely, but almost entirely dependent on energy imports. The Wi-Fi and lights that are enabling all of us to be on this call are predominantly coming from South Africa, are predominantly being fueled by coal burning currently, since Eskom is mostly fueled that way. So it's starting from a very real place of a desire for energy independence in Eswatini, which we really need. And we've been talking about this for about 20 years and are suddenly rushing into this, even though we've known that this has been an issue, especially with Eskom and South Africa's power issues. We stand to lose considerably if we are switched off in any way. And as a result, that's why the country drafted the Energy Master Plan document in 2018, which kind of projected our solutions, or 10 different options that the country realistically could look at over the next 15 years to adopt. And 2 of the options of the 10 included coal. The rest were variations of renewable energy or continuing as is. And even though that document finalized by stating that an energy mix that was mostly focused on renewable energy and keeping slight imports running for the considerable future, that was a conclusion, but somehow we've ended up on the route of going down coal and creating a 300 megawatt power plant. So a megawatt, if anyone doesn't know, that's the standard kind of energy unit when we're talking about, it's 1 million watts basically of power. And as part of that, there are also a solar power project and a biofuel project that are part of that, but they're only 30 megawatts each, so very much dwarfed by the Lubugu project. So that gives a little bit of context as to, yes, we need such energy projects, but we've gone down a very different route than the country was actually proposing just a couple of years ago.
All right, anyone can go next.
Hi, I'll follow on from Dane. Yeah, I think as Dane mentioned, the whole Lubugu power plant project is really kind of being defended by the fact that, yes, we need more secure energy in Eswatini, as much as our energy roadmap kind of says there will be an energy mix in the works, which means our government is aware that there should be clean energy in the mix, and they have started making strides in moving in that direction. But of course, if Lubugu goes ahead, you know, yeah, it's just a huge thing which will really dwarf the other kind of clean energy projects. And I think on my side, in terms of how does this affect maybe what I do on a daily basis or the community I'm in, my greatest objection to it is that besides even the fact that globally we are all currently talking about how bad fossil fuels are to the environment and to our planet, it's just issues of looking at past projects in Eswatini, where a lot of things tend to come or are introduced to the nation as projects which are going to bring economic relief. They'll be bringing more jobs which are stable. and will really make the country more competitive and develop at a better rate. But I always take it with a pinch of salt, because
whilst we wait for Kulegani to come back, I think we can move on to anyone who wants to chip in, and then we will return to Kulegani. Oh, I think he's back. Kulegani, please unmute.
Sorry about that. Really, really sorry. As mentioned earlier, I tend to take such huge projects, which are proposed by the government, with a pinch of salt, because in the past, we've seen certain projects which our government takes on. And the key point is we tend to be promised jobs. We tend to be promised so many things. But when you look at it, we end up not even getting the jobs we've been promised. And even if people do get jobs, there isn't a sense of fairness in them. That's one. And then there comes the issues of managing the limited natural, I suppose, resources we have. Looking at, I remember sometime last year, we did have a Zoom meeting with other stakeholders on the very issue of Lukubu. And there was one of the guests on that discussion was an old lady who lives near the current, I think it's the Mbaga area. And she was expressing how projects which have come to the area have at times left them with waters which have been contaminated. And at the moment, she was expressing that they cannot even drink from the water reservoirs which they used to use in the past, because those waters have been slightly contaminated. So her concern was, if these projects come back, what will happen with the already limited water resources in the area? And not to mention land issues, which are a fragile thing in our country. And we've seen in the past where the compensation of people who've been moved from their rightful areas of life has taken forever. It's taken years to compensate them. People have been displaced. Even the new areas they've been taken to do not seem to live up to what our government has proposed. So I think from a community perspective, it's something I would definitely not see, as much as it is, I suppose, proposed as something which would be great for us. But I don't quite have confidence with our government and in the way in which it handles huge projects. So it could end up being a white elephant, which even the so-called would-be current investors end up dumping it in the long run, because the global movement will say it's just something that's no longer bankable. So yes, we need energy, but we should be really focusing on putting all the money we have, or investor money, in clean energy than going back to coal when the world is moving away from coal.
Thank you, Kulegani. I would like to toss the question to Ngaliso.
Okay, thank you for that. Such an interesting discussion. I think for me, I appreciate all the points that have been made. Why investing in a coal power plant, in a thermal plant, would be detrimental to our communities, to our environment, and all that is at stake. But I think the key issue for me here is that Eswatini does need baseload power, and coal can provide that solution in the near term. And so this also we have to address in a sense of urgency, because as you know, everyone is complaining about the high cost of electricity in Eswatini. And when you think about the ease of doing business, that is one major thing that is always highlighted, to say that an impediment to business in Eswatini is the cost of electricity. And so we need to come up with quick solutions to address the problem. And the other issue is that the opportunity cost of not using the coal right now, it's actually going to be quite high, because as you say, the world is moving away from coal. And so we have this natural resource that we haven't used. And so the time to use it is actually quickly running out. And so Eswatini has to think about how it gains this power independence. But obviously, this does not mean that when government decides to implement such projects, it does not have it does not look at the repercussions in terms of our environment, in terms of our communities, because we do environmental impact assessments, and they are there to address these kind of issues. And so it then becomes about the management and the technology that we can use to minimize the cost on the environment, on our communities. And then lastly, what I want to say is that overall, I think for us in Eswatini, this is about addressing the poverty issue. A lot of people in rural Eswatini do not afford access to clean energy. And so if we can connect everyone to the grid and they can have access to energy, we can then stimulate all kinds of activities, business, but also people can have the independence to sort of participate in productive economic activities. And as the economy grows, we will need a stable and a stable source and reliable source of power going forward into the future. I think we need to think about it. The master plan, yes, it provides an idealistic plan for the kingdom in terms of the options that are available, but it does not preclude government from actually deciding on what seems to be the best option for us now, and we can review it going forward. It's not something that is cast in stone that needs to be followed to the dot. And so we need to keep on assessing the situation.
Thank you so much, Mangaliso. That was an interesting perspective you brought forward. Unless anyone else has something to add, we would like to move on to the next question. All right, then I will hand over to Lynn to ask the next question.
So our next question is, what are the environmental, social, and economic impacts of this project? Kulerani mentioned this could be a white elephant. If this project continues, how do we ensure that it does not become another white elephant?
Can I start? A quick one.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, so this is meant to be a private sector-led project. It's supposed to be self-paying in terms of the fact that we all need power. And so if it is financed through loans or whatever, the private sector and everyone is going to consume power. And so it's not government money, not tax money that is going to be funding this kind of activity. It's going to be funded through the private sector, and they're going to make it a viable business for themselves.
Thank you, Mangaliso, for that. Could you please have Kulerani?
Please do unmute.
Sorry about that. Mangaliso, thanks for highlighting that the project will be funded by the private sector. Despite, fair enough, yes, we might say that private sector funded projects maybe tend to operate a bit better than maybe would be ones funded maybe thoroughly by the government. But even that still poses a lot of risks. I mean, even if it's private funds coming in, what guarantee would we have those very funders and backers who see an opportunity now will still feel it's worth continuing with the investment, let's say maybe 15 or 20 years from now, at a time where possibly 15 years from now, the story will be totally different. And we'll be left with a huge mess to try and clean up. And once again, as you mentioned, it's an issue of jobs. But as I briefly mentioned before, I tend to not quite buy that one as much, because we've heard so many times that there's a big project coming into the country, there'll be job, this and that. But you find that the people actually who are within the vicinity of these projects end up not being the benefactors of it. And hence why we start going back to the government to complain, to ask for ways out. And during those moments when there's upheaval, of course, you then tend to find the would-be private investors start pulling out, because we also have to be cognizant of the fact that on my side, as someone who's a community activist, it's not just a matter of thinking just because it's private sector funded, it's all kind of going to be well. It just won't, because unfortunately at the moment our government does not offer us enough confidence to kind of give the would-be investors even guarantees, to give us as community members guarantees of these so-called jobs. So it ends up leaving us as broken communities, displaced from our homes, displaced from our families, and nothing much to show, let alone touching on issues of health, our future health, because we've seen some of the reports and the court cases of former mine workers in South Africa, where the health implications will not pop up maybe tomorrow, but it might be an issue 15, 20 years down the line, where the repercussions of me working as a part of that plant starts destroying my health, therefore putting a burden on our already crippling health system.
Thank you, Kulagani, for such an eye-opening answer. Can I also direct this question to Dr. Jamini?
My apologies, Lindell. I for some few seconds I got lost, so I probably lost that question. But I'll probably just start a little bit on the earlier question that you touched on the.
I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, on what the Lupogo power plant means for me. It probably links to the question on the impacts. I've been involved in the environment sector for probably 22 years since I graduated from university, and one of the things I've observed over the years is there's a very obvious and a very visible lack of commitment towards environmental protection in the country. I'm just talking from an environmental scientist point of view. Over the years, I've seen a lot of environmental degradation happening, despite, some of the good legislation policies that we have in the country. So a project such as this one is a good example of that. Not so long ago, the country committed itself through what they call the NDC, which is nationally determined contributions. Basically, these are a set of commitments that the country makes to say, we as a country, we as Eswatini, this is what we will contribute towards fighting climate change as part of the Paris Agreement. Now, one of the mitigation contributions that we are very clearly stated in that document is that we want to double the share of renewables by 2030. So obviously a project like this just cancels that completely, because all of a sudden you have this huge project which will probably take a majority of the energy mix in the country, and obviously renewables are going to be right at the back, if we put it that way. So for me, it's a very good example of the disjointer, the mismatch between government policy and practice. You have good environmental policies, government commits to these policies, but when it comes to implementation, it's zero. So that is one of the biggest reasons why I have a concern on this project, because yeah, on the NDC part, we are just undoing all that we've committed ourselves to do. Yes, there are initiatives to get into renewables like the solar power plants and so on. But honestly speaking, with the amount of investment that is going to go into this project, I mean, it could do a lot in increasing the renewable energy share in the country by 2050, which we've just put upside down now with this particular project. So our emissions are going to definitely go up as a country. So I have, from that perspective, I have serious reservations. And then, of course, one of the issues is the impacts, again, the environmental impacts. I've already highlighted some, which is increase in the greenhouse gas emissions that we are likely to see. There's a number of environmental issues that are associated with such power plants, including, of course, the issue of waste. Waste, all that the waste is gonna be, the scarring of the landscape, because that means we need to mine even more coal. That means the whole low-field landscape now will be scarred, because I'm sure now people will be looking for open cast mining, which seems to be more attractive in this day and age. Issues of sedimentation, the release of other, toxic and unhealthy gases, your nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxides, particulate matter, mercury, and other things. And that's in addition to acid mine drainage, and of course the loss of the ecosystem loss that is associated with that. So for those reasons, again, from an environmental point of view, I have huge reservations. And of course, we know that mining also requires access to land and natural resources, such as water, which then competes with other land uses. We are a country that is still not self-sufficient when it comes to food. And if we use most of this land for some of these initiatives, then we are likely to have problems meeting our other needs like food, including addressing the issues of poverty, which I will also touch on probably later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jamini, for that. Mancha, could you please also answer what's your take on this question?
Thank you. I did come up with a couple of questions as well that I would like to address to all of you. I did understand a lot of the points that you guys made about the negative implications of what could happen if this plan went ahead, about how coal obviously is really contributes to a lot of greenhouse gas emission. And I'm familiar with all of those points, but the points, the other points, like the political or the economic aspect of it is something that I think is the real issue here, because we see from like people and their points of view, that there is dissatisfaction. There is a dissatisfaction about how there's not enough electricity and energy. There's obviously that because Eswatini is having to import so much from Moz and SA, and there's obviously that need or urgent need that to be self-sufficient. So there's that dissatisfaction among people that there's not enough electricity, and there's another dissatisfaction or distrust of if this plan went ahead, would it actually be feasible and would it actually benefit the people? Moving into that dissatisfaction is when there's a lot going on in the chat about how the private funding will really work. I guess there's a lot more transparency that people would like, but my main question here is that if private funding was used for this project and not government funding, the people's question would probably be that who would benefit from this project more? If it is private funders who are going out of their way funding this project, and obviously, like someone else mentioned, that you're not sure if the private funding will continue to exist in the long term. So there's obviously that question of how who will it really benefit? So in my point of view, it's strictly an opinion and not just like facts I'm giving you, also questions to you guys, that like which dissatisfaction is to be prioritized more, the one where more energy is needed, more electricity is needed, for which there is obviously the Eswatini Energy Master Plan that was devised, but I guess that will take longer amount of time. Or should the dissatisfaction regarding this coal power plant project be prioritized and addressed by doing, taking an alternative method? Just closing in on that, I think, personal opinion, that we are looking here at either a short-term solution that obviously will benefit the economy and will create jobs, that is going to definitely solve a lot of problems right now. But in the long term, as a student, as an idealist, I would say, is the thing that I'm thinking is long term, if we do have an option to have renewable energy sources, and we have an option where we haven't really gotten into this project yet, and we haven't made all the negative impacts that we could probably make, why not stop right now and try to switch to a renewable method, or just something that would not just benefit the environment, but like the country's economy and the health, like not make the health sector worse. And yeah, wrapping that up, if anyone would like to touch upon how do we make sure that the private funding ensures that people will benefit from it and not the private funders?
Thank you, Mancha, for that. I totally agree with you that opening this Lugugu power plant would be a very short-term, solution for like jobs and everything, and a long-term effect on the environment. So moving on to our next question, given that the Eswatini Master Plan suggests that this is not one of the best options, why is the project continuing? And I'd like to direct this to Dane and Mangaliso.
Thank you, Lindelwa, and thanks, Mancha, for a good overview and of questions and issues at stake. So to directly answer this question, I think personal opinion as it relates to what I said earlier, it's about money and power. There's a lot of profit that is still to be made by the extraction industry, by the fossil fuel industry. And we can see that playing out around the world. That's why there are still projects being set up like this. There's still money to be made. Typically, it remains at the top, which is what we've seen from most projects like these over the last 100 years or so. There's no reason to see why that would change. And it's probably the reason why this is being pushed at the expense of energy solutions that would be more, democratic in their use and allocation of resources. But yeah, it's very hard to imagine how the current cost will work moving forward. From an economic point of view, the greatest risk of this for this project is that it becomes a stranded asset, that we started, that during its construction, that at some point far too soon within its 40-year proposed lifespan, it has to close down because the cost of coal or fossil fuels just is not actually worth it anymore. And we're already seeing that happen. About 3 different coal power projects were shut down in South Africa last year: Ghana, Nigeria, India, the UK. And it's a variation of public pressure versus investor pull, as well as investor pullout. Now, these things they're happening for a reason, and they're already happening, and they'll pick up pace increasingly over the years, very quickly, in fact, as we see renewables take over the cost market, really. And jobs for renewables are already 3 times more on offer than in the fossil fuel industry, and that's only going to grow. So it really comes down to this long-term, short-term question. So why would we be putting 12 billion emalangeni, which is the proposed budget for this, or the initial one at least, towards creating secure energy just for a few decades and perhaps jobs for 1 generation, when we could be investing in the future and jobs that will last multiple generations? So is this kind of short-term thinking that has got the world in the problem that it's in at the moment, and is what will keep Eswatini in the problems that we're in? This is hardly news that we've had to come up with energy solutions. We've known about this for 20 years. It's more a failure of leadership than anything else that we're at this position. It's not for lack of knowing. And we've been told about this for a long time. So to suddenly be scurrying around having to put together something very quick is kind of inexcusable, really. So yes, coal is our quickest option to get baseload power because people know it and we've got some coal. But that shouldn't derail us from the longer term vision here of what we should actually be achieving. And in fact, what the proposed solution was in the master plan was that actually we retain importing some energy, of which would be coal from South Africa. Due to economies of scale there, it shouldn't be all up to a tiny country to be entirely food and energy sufficient. We don't have to actually get that. But we should be flipping it on its head and aiming for getting 70% generated locally and importing still some indefinitely. Why not? It's just about weaning ourselves off instead of going cold turkey. And just to summarize, which segues from the previous question, 1 in 8 deaths in 2018 were from air pollution. 1 in 8. I mean, that's crazy, and that's going to keep on going up. Mpumalanga is already the 2nd or 3rd most polluted area in the world, which many people don't know, due to concentration of coal power plants predominantly. And we use that energy here in Eswatini, but we're also getting that air here. You know, the pollution doesn't know borders. So do we really want to be contributing to that? We've seen how air pollution has exacerbated the COVID-19 pandemic and made people more susceptible. The list really goes on and on. Coal is an incredible energy source by itself, but for every other reason, it falls short. The only reason people are pushing it is because there's still a lot of money to be made out of it, and I don't think that that's the right way to be looking at this.
Okay, thank you for that. Very interesting. I think here the major thing that we need to appreciate as well is the scale of the project. 300 megawatts compared to gigawatts in our neighbor, South Africa. The 300 megawatts would be enough to secure our demand, which is currently at 230. And so while we want to invest in coal in the near term, it does not then shut down any other investments within renewable energy, within the renewable energy space. In fact, this should also give us the drive to ensure that we are looking at possibilities within the renewable space to ensure that it also grows to a level that is actually able to achieve the vision or the roadmap which is put on the Energy Master Plan. And by having the Energy Master Plan, it does show the commitment that government has in terms of diversifying our energy mix in Eswatini. But at the same time, there are tough decisions that need to be made in order to ensure that we save the economy, we save livelihoods in the near term and address our current problems now, because while we are happy to import all of our energy from South Africa, the jobs are being created in South Africa, and the pollution is a problem. And so let us also talk about solutions as to how can we apply technologies within the different energies that we want to use to ensure that we mitigate the problems. At the same time, failure to implement this project is not an answer to say we should stop implementing any projects at all. Let us work at putting measures in place to put Eswatini in a position where it is able to implement these kind of developmental problems in a much more cost-effective and socially sustainable manner, and environmentally sustainable manner that will create benefits for the majority of the population. If we do not implement this project, it is going to be the low-income households that are going to suffer going forward, because then they do not afford to use electricity currently, and they have to depend on fuel wood for their livelihoods, and still that's an environmental problem for them. And at the same time, it is about the time they spend collecting this fuel wood instead of engaging in other productive economic activities, which would put them at par with their counterparts in urban areas, for example. And so I think also we must appreciate the privilege that we are talking from here, because all of us are enjoying the electricity, we can afford it now. But for the small person who needs this clean, affordable and reliable source of energy, so that they can move up the economic ladder, government has to think about all of those variables. And yes, the problems are there, and government has put in place systems and institutions that are supposed to deal with those problems. So I think it's an issue of bringing all of those stakeholders together to say, if we are implementing this project, what are the roles that need to be taken care of in terms of the various institutions in the economy, your environmental authority, your social groups, your NGOs in the economy, so that we come up with a workable solution that provides the maximum benefit and welfare to the economy, to the people, than to be stuck in idealistic arguments that at the end of the day do not do much to move the status quo for our most vulnerable people in the economy.
Thank you so much for these replies. And I think it's very important to note one thing that Mangaliso just said, and I heavily agree on, is that we are here on this format on Zoom, speaking from a place of privilege. So do we trust the government? The chat has clearly said, yeah, we don't. Do we trust where the funding is coming from? No. But do we need the energy? Yes. And not we sitting on this Zoom chat, but we in rural communities. Do we need the jobs? Yes. And we need to start looking at solutions, because if we're so against this coal power plant, bring us solutions. And with these solutions and alternatives, can we even afford these alternatives? Now, that's the question we have now, is are there any alternatives to this coal power plant? And if they are, can we afford them? And I will open this one to anyone, but I think especially Kulegani, and actually anyone.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have to really move into the alternative clean energy. At times, if we are in a mindset of saying we are trying to get investors, or even if it's a public-private partnership, we should be pushing on getting funding towards the clean energy, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's hydro. We just have to amp those up. And for the argument to say maybe people who are in rural areas, they would benefit more if we have this project going ahead and things like that. As someone who lives here on a daily basis and interacts with people who do not have electricity as we speak, it doesn't take much. If only we are willing to really invest, especially in solar. I mean, it's one of those low-hanging fruits. If we are really hoping as a country to invest in solar, a lot can be achieved. A lot of, if we're looking at it also from just a home perspective, energy I need at home, lights, to keep my lights on, to maybe do a few things, we have to go into solar. And we should not also forget that Eswatini has 3 major sugarcane factories. Sugarcane factories who tend to create a lot of energy. So those factories combined, the amount of output of energy they have, surely it can also be fed back onto the grid. So there are so many ways of mixing in terms of having a decent amount of energy in the country. But the question always lies on, is our government willing to put as much energy and investment towards green alternatives? And maybe if we start having that conversation, we might get somewhere. But I think, as we all, most of the panelists said before, such big projects tend to come with big money for a few individuals. And then therefore it crosses out the issue of saying it's going to empower the poor. I really beg to differ on that. It's always said that, but in the long run, it really does not empower the poor. It keeps the poor where they are. The people who get rich are the people who will be facilitating all those tenders, making sure that the most elite in the country continue being rich at the expense of the masses. So I don't think it's the best of arguments to say such a project would empower the poor. I don't think it will. We have to really emphasize on getting more money onto green alternatives. And we have enough of an energy mix in the green space. And with the new green technologies which are out there, we can really make a difference. We are a small country after all.
Anyone else want to add before we move on to the next question?
I'd just like to add that renewables are officially cheaper in most parts of the world as of last year. So the cost argument would probably be in favor of our energy from a consumer point of view being more affordable and cheaper, going down a mixed bag of renewable energy routes rather than going fossil fuels. That price is likely to increase actually over time and not decrease. So we might shoot ourselves in the feet and end up doing a project to basically get cheaper electricity, and ironically it flips on its head and we have more expensive power. That's really not unthinkable for that to even happen within the next decade.
One last one, please.
Okay.
All right.
I think we're not going to be stuck on coal. We are still going to invest in renewable energies, but currently renewable energies are getting cheaper, but they're still unaffordable for a lot of households, especially low-income households. And so there's still a time frame that we have to go through to get to a level where renewable energies are going to be the option for everyone. And at the same time, let us not demonize making money. Money is something that we all want to make, and it just fuels the various economic activities, and we want to make sure that everyone is in a position to make money. And some of these projects are here to stimulate, to provide the opportunities for people to see opportunity, to take advantage, and place themselves in a position where they're able to make money and empower themselves to change their livelihoods. And so I think going forward, yes, we expect renewables to be cheap, but it's still a problem, which is why it's so difficult to get any solar project, any wind powered project established in Eswatini, because the reality is that it is still not viable, especially it's still not viable at the scale that we want to establish the 40 megawatts, the 10 megawatts of solar. It's still not sustainable for these investors.
Thank you so much. This is a quick notice that we are running out of time, but I do see Mancha's hand. So Mancha, please do say what you have to say, and then we can quickly move on.
I will say it quickly. Just to add on to what they were saying, that yes, it's a very simple concept that as it's not renewable, when the coal and any fossil fuel, as it depletes, we will have a bigger expense if we spend on that and not renewable energy. It is definitely true that renewable energy at the current time is not as cheap as we would like it to be, but in the long term it might be. And just a rhetorical question that I wanted to put out there is, we are talking about poverty and how we want to fix that and immediately. But like borrowing that proverb of shooting ourselves in the feet, that is it ethically correct for us as the people who have the privilege to go ahead with this power plant or go ahead with any plans that we know is going to very harshly negatively impact the poor people or people who are financially unable to afford much? Like, if we are going ahead with this plan, there are so many effects, like the effects on the mine workers that it will have, the effects of pollution, and all the stats that show that pollution, air pollution causing diseases and death, and all other underlying impacts that it will have that we are not highlighting at the moment, but we know as people who have researched and are holding that privilege, we know that they will happen. Is it ethically correct to still go ahead and portray it as a short-term solution that will solve poverty? Maybe. I personally wouldn't think so.
Thank you so much. These are great questions, and the chat is really getting heated up at this moment, but we are running out of time. But there is a question I did see in the chat by Molefe, and I just really wanted to pose it out there. And in closing, after that question, we would ask that the panelists give their final concluding statements and words, discussing, what strategies are needed, whether formally or informally, to bridge the gap between sustainability and development, especially in a developing country. And the question by Molefe is, the Paris Agreement made a commitment to establish a fund to help developing countries move away from fossil fuels and switch to clean energy source. What is the experience of Eswatini in accessing such a fund? And before I hand over to all the panelists to give us their short, brief conclusions and sum ups, which I beg of you will be 1 minute each, I just have to also ask a question that, when we look at the global north and how they want us to stop using fossil fuels and, for the environment and all of that, isn't it kind of weird that it's them asking the South that is currently trying to develop to get to a place that they're at to ask us to stop using it, when this should be the time where we actually use it now? But that's just my question. Let's move on to the closing statements when we're talking about strategies and whether formally or informally, and answering Molefe's question in the chat. We see the chat, we are reading the chat, and it is so interactive and we love it. So I will start with Dr. Jamini, and everyone, you have 1 minute, please.
Thanks, Owenkosi. I think what I wanted to say, again, looking at the Lubu project, is that I think the critical thing that we need to consider here is not just the availability of energy, it's the equitability of access to energy. I mean, Eswatini, as much as we pride ourselves having the largest access rate in terms of electricity, but a lot of Maswati are still relying on fuel wood, for instance, for energy access. And I don't think this project will be a silver bullet that all of a sudden you will see a 50, 60% drop in prices. I doubt that's going to happen. This, especially if it's private sector driven. Private sector is all about the bottom line profits, and you're not likely to see the prices coming down. Especially not 5 years from now, probably when the project is completed. Hopefully, or hopefully not. I hope it just doesn't take off. Now, what I wanted to say is that with the limited investment in renewables or in innovation in renewables, which we know is largely driven by, of course, the big companies, the large companies are still, making a lot of money from oil and the non-renewables. So there's still limited investment in the renewable sector. And that also links to the question by Molefe that there's funding that is available from different funds out there, climate change related funds, to invest in clean or renewable energy. We should be taking advantage of that. But unfortunately, we seem not to be doing that. So with limited investment in the renewables, you'll see limited innovations and therefore probably the relatively high costs that we see. But we can see that those costs are going down with more companies starting to have interest in renewables. A good example, of what a will and the drive can do. I mean, Tesla, Elon Musk has really done a lot. The electric vehicles have been touted, but they were coming out as just maybe examples of what's going to be there in 10, 20, 30 years from now. But Elon said, no, we can start actually investing in this now. But because other companies were so used to the business as usual approach, there was no investment in that. So we need to start investing on the renewables. If we invest in that, then there will be a lot of innovation and the costs will come down, and we look at renewables as we see coal today as just normal. Now, my closing statement is that, I know I've gone past my minute. Going back to a study that was done about 50 years by Professor Meadows and others, which was commissioned by the Club of Rome, where they looked at simulations of what the future looks like. It's amazing that what they simulated is seemingly coming to pass, because they looked at world population growth, industrialization, pollution generation, food production, and non-renewable resource depletion. And we can see that as the population growth, the human population goes up, of course, there's lots of demand on resources. Industrialization is going up, and so is pollution. But food production is going down. Natural resource, non-renewable resources are being depleted. The coal that we're talking about today is going to run out in the distant future. So the earlier we start looking at the possibilities, but unfortunately, once we focus ourselves in the short term and we have this short-sightedness, the tendency is that we forego the future, and by the time we're in the future, then we are surprised. Oh, coal is out of now. What next? Then we start scrambling for other solutions. So I'm of the view that we must start being innovative and also invest ourselves in research and development to look at renewable energy sources, amongst other, of course, environmentally friendly alternatives. Now, lastly, individual behavior. Our consumption patterns as individuals, even within this Zoom session, is what actually drives what we see. As long as we consume business as usual, things will not change. So it's basically all comes back again to our consumption patterns. So if we consume things that will require more energy, because we also have to manage the demand side of things by increasing efficiency, efficient processes, things that will require less energy going into the future, because we're living in a finite earth. It's not a limitless environment. So we need to take that into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we will go to Kulegani. A reminder, 1 minute.
Yes, I'll be extremely short. I think mine, it's really to urge everyone out there, in whatever capacity you're in, to say, to put pressure on our government, to ask them implementing such a project, but start investing a bit more energy and a bit of willpower on renewables. Because I might be wrong, but history in our country and our governance has proved that such mega projects only benefit a few in the country. Yes, we all have to make money, we all have to live, but history has shown in Eswatini, mega projects only benefit the elite, never the masses. So can we all, in the spaces we're in, to rally for the project to be stopped?
Thank you. And we will go to Rashida Mancha.
You're good. Again, I will adhere to 1 minute. I can't believe I haven't brought this up yet, but Bangladesh, where I'm from, I think has a very similar situation going on where climate and environment is not given as much priority as I believe it should be. And we, again, reiterating a lot of the things people have said, that we prioritize the economy a lot, and it is necessary to for other things to be possible, but prioritizing the environment is something we could start doing, and I personally would want to. Someone brought up how the global north is encouraging such renewable energy projects, and personally, we as developing nations, I can speak for Bangladesh, are not in the position to really to totally switch to renewable energy forms. Yes, that is true, but I think it is very necessary for us to start trying to, because we see all that is going down, how the climate is affected, and how in turn all of our lives are affected. So is the economy. So I believe it is a good thing to start trying, not to alienate the people who are trying to solve the problem of poverty and scarce electricity right now. It is all the solution of this coal power plant might solve all of those problems in the short term, but again, I think it is not a good long-term solution. And all the alternatives mentioned by my fellow panelists who do know better. And yeah, I think those alternatives would be good to pursue or start trying to pursue at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Dane, next. 1 minute.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah. So Eswatini currently is revising its nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, like the rest of the world. I'm personally working in that at the moment because it involves a lot of different entities and people. And it's really kind of crazy to be doing that and looking at the kind of goals and ambitions and targets and lingo and language that we're using, whilst at the same time pursuing projects like this, which don't actually come up in all of the planning and considerations that we have for the now and the next 5 years and the next 50 years. So it's embarrassing to be doing that, because you realize at this exact moment, and if such a project comes through, we all look like a big fat hypocrite, basically, and we put our access to the kinds of resources that the global north is rightfully allocating to the south to assist in not having to go down these routes by going down these routes. So why jeopardize that and put that at risk by going, and last but not least, we don't have time actually to be having these kinds of debates on a large scale. Like, we should have stopped doing this many yesterdays ago, and we wouldn't be in this position. We would have fast-tracked rightfully the energy solutions we've known about for decades. They would be then cheaper, more accessible, more readily available today, and we would have gained a lot of time. So yeah, really the best thing to do is just empower yourself with knowledge and see what direction is best for everybody to move in.
Thank you. And lastly, Mangaliso.
Thank you. I'll be quick. The good news is that no one is against renewables in Eswatini, and certainly the government of Eswatini is not against renewable energy. In fact, there are plans to roll out 40 megawatts of solar and biomass energy through the energy regulator. And so going forward in the future, we want to mainstream renewable energy in Eswatini. But currently, we know that people must live, and poverty is not idealistic. We need to address issues now. We need to recognize our current reality so that we are able to address people's needs now. And so we need to embrace our future in terms of the investments that needs to be made to take care of our long-term development goals. But at the same time, we need to also embrace our current reality, which is real for a lot of people. And so access to clean, reliable, and affordable energy or power is actually key to social and economic development. The short term is real, as well as we need to be cognizant of our long-term developmental goals. I think we need to use all the information sets that we have and look at the different spaces that we operate in and ensure that we are thinking about the overall benefits and welfare to the economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for such eye-opening replies. We have come to the end of our panel, and my words or comments on this whole thing, as someone who's also from that area, Stegi, I agree with Kulegani. I think we should be against this project, as we are in a changing world, and we should look at more greener alternatives instead of going back into the past. Thank you. And again, thank you for the panelists who took their time. And we really learned a lot from this whole thing. And I'll pass it on to Owe.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And just to add on to what Lynn is saying, thank you so much to the panelists and to everyone who attended. This was such a fruitful conversation. And I best believe, I do hope that we have a part 2, because I believe we're not done yet. I don't think we're done yet. The conversation needs to go on. And we'd like to thank each and everyone who attended and the panelists. Just to share the poll. So this is what we got back. There was a poll that was we announced in the chat, and we have what are your sentiments around this project? And we have 2 people saying they are in support of the project, and we have 18 who are against the project, and we have 2 who are neither for or against the project, and 1 person who says it is a necessary evil. And just to briefly state where I lie, I basically stand with Mangaliso. I think definitely we understand the environment and all the repercussions that will happen, but there's still questions that are not being answered. Like, the fact that we do need the jobs and the fact that we do need the energy, and we're not getting solutions. And we can look to green energy and we can speak about green energy on Zooms and all of that, but how long will that take to be implemented? We will not be waiting 3 or 4 days, 3 or 4 months for green energy. We need electricity today. People need their homes lit up today. So I think it's a necessary evil, but that's just my opinion. And if we can have a part 2, we can go further into that. We would like to recognize, before we close, everyone who participated in the chat. Thank you so much for your fruitful conversation, for the questions, and keeping the chat alive. And lastly, we would like to mention that we do have our lovely principal here, Ms. Patricia Angoy, and we are so grateful to her and we love her a lot. And on that note, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to the panelists, to my co-moderator, to the team, to the dream team. Thank you everyone, and I believe it's Happy Earth Day. We will leave the chat open for a brief moment. We saw a few hands, we saw the questions, so if you want to interact, this is the time now. But on behalf of everyone, thank you everyone, and to the technical team, to everyone in the background, thank you. Panelists, we are grateful. Lynn, you're amazing. Thank you everyone.
Thanks, Owenkosi. Thank you very much. I wanted to say thank you for inviting me. I noticed that I was the only one who's not a Waterford alumni, so I was the party pooper here. So thank you very
you're
much.
Part
again.
of the family now.
You're one of us now. You're officially one of us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. Thanks for engaging us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everybody, and thanks for hosting. And again, just put an open invitation out to anybody to reach out if you've got questions or want to speak or debate, because debate is healthy. I'm very glad that Mangaliso was here. Otherwise, we'd all just be nodding at each other in an echo chamber, which is not healthy.
I also saw Zandile Ndlela raised her, I think it's her hand. If you want to say something now, this is your chance. We're sorry we couldn't get to you. But that
sorry, it was a mistake. It was the first fat finger issue, so it wasn't intentional. Sorry about that.
All right, but the meeting is still open for any interaction, and we'd like to hear a few opinions from the people in the chat. It was such lovely engagement. I really, really appreciated reading the chat. It was heated. I really liked it.
On the funds, they're there, but it's hard to access those funds. There's lots of red tape, and it's all about bureaucracy, processes, and now you have to have an institution that's going to be a broker to sort of handle all of these applications. And so it's just a huge, no, it doesn't help in terms of giving us the practical solutions now.
Well, I would disagree with that. I don't think it's a lot of red tape. I would equate the requirements similar to what you have in the conventional funding mechanisms. Of course, the difference now is that these are funds that have specific objectives and specific, they're funding a specific sort of line of projects, which are obviously climate change related. I think that's the only, I don't think there's a lot of red tape. The funds are available. It's just a question of the willingness. Again, one of the things that what I said is that the whole, unfortunately, the whole economic system is still driven by oil, the fossil fuels. The biggest funders are still the fossil fuels and so on. So obviously, you won't see an immediate shift, an easier shift towards renewables, but the funding is there. It's just for us to have that willingness to access those funds. I don't think there's much red tape, really, honestly, to to stop us from accessing those funds. There's been calls, even there's also regional funds that are available for Eswatini to tap on. I mean, there's quite a number of funds that are available out there. It's probably a question of which fund and, of course, the scale of the project.
Yeah, I think it was a great conversation. I think one thing that really inspired me about this conversation is actually, being around alumni, and especially having Mancha here, because it just reminds me each and every day that, as young people, we have such a big role to play. And we need to start thinking about it and looking into it and actually just, researching and doing the work and putting the work in. And, we definitely do have our different opinions, but, that's the whole point. And I think it's just an urge to young people that, we've better just like start pulling up our socks really high now.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what I just put in the chat, is it really is about political will at the moment. All the ingredients are there. We are being offered a lot of assistance, technical assistance, professional assistance, and financial assistance from a huge variety of partners and sources around the world. And we're already accessing them at the moment, and they'll become more and more available as the world shifts gear. This is the decade of change. So whatever the reality is now, whatever the cost of renewables or the efficiency of them, be sure that'll be different tomorrow. What are the amount of funding available? Be sure that'll be different tomorrow. Whatever the impediments to that change, be sure it'll be different tomorrow. So, why go against the flow? I think if we just accept that things are how they are today, therefore there's only one easy way, I think it's quite short-sighted. But it comes from an understandable place. We're all the results of, the conditioning of our societies that we've been through up until this point. So it involves a lot of unlearning. So I think as long as we're open to that, then, we have a chance. That's my optimistic hat. Sometimes that hat is not on.
Thank you so much, everyone. Mancha, I will give you like 30 seconds because we need to close this thing and go to sleep.
Sounds good. Yeah, very much second that optimistic take, and just want to say thank you because I am very honored to be here. And personally, coming into this talk, I did not know it was so many alumni, and that definitely was a very interesting aspect of it, to hear from so many people who have been to Waterford and think in so many different ways. And it was definitely very, very nice to have a different perspective than like against this coal power plant. It was very eye-opening. And yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will be closing the meeting now. Thank you for staying with us. I understand an hour is not enough. If we could, we would be chatting the entire day. But we do have to close the chat. And please, I urge you all to go have dinner. It is dinner time here in Eswatini. So please do. And we will continue having these speaker series, so please keep on the lookout. And yes, ma'am, we do need a part 2. I hope the people are listening. We require a part 2, a longer one even. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night. They're demanding a part 2, please. Yes, so we are hoping. Thank you, everyone.
Lights out. Thank you, everybody.
Yes,
thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.